Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Nice, simple project today. I'm going to take a break from the long-term series that I've been working on and just do a little fun one, which is going to be an app that displays a countdown to the next SpaceX launch. And so it's going to look like this. We'll have two pieces of information. We're getting the type of rocket that's being launched and then the countdown to it. Simple interface. We're going to use quite a few technologies in the background. We'll use Provider to resolve the future. We use HTTP to go out to the SpaceX API and get the data. I'm only getting two pieces of data, but one of them happens to be a nested object, so we'll be doing a little modeling with nested objects, and we'll also be setting a timer so that the count is updated every second. So that's what's on tap for today. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, folks, so to get started, I am going to pull up a terminal and I'm going to type Flutter create. I'm just going to call it SpaceX. And when that's done, I'm going to open it in Visual Studio Code. Okay, so let's do a little housekeeping there. So let's just go into main and let's just get rid of the primary swatch. We'll get rid of all this green here. I guess you can, no, I'm going to take out the primary swatch too. Just keep the visual density. And then everything from class my home page down, we can just kill that. And I want to create a new class and we'll just call it home. And that's going to extend a stateless widget. And we'll do a build method in there. And then let's just take out this my home page up here in home and replace that with home. And that's just going to kind of clear out the errors, clear out the demo project and give us a real blank slate. So before we start, I want to use three packages in this application. I want to use Provider to bring in the future that we're going to be introducing with our API call. I want to bring in HTTP, which we'll use to get the data from our API. And then I want to use Google Fonts because we're going to use a countdown and we want to pull in a mono font so that the font isn't jumping around on us as it counts down. So I'm going to go to pub.dev and let's start with Google Fonts. And we can just go to the installing tab, grab the dependency there, copy it, and put it inside a pubspec.yaml right below the Cupertino icons. All right, that's one. Then we want HTTP. And then lastly, we want Provider. All right, and then also before we boot up, we're going to want to bring in our assets. And so I've given you a PNG file with a rocket down here in the description. So go ahead and download that. And then create a new folder called Assets in the root of your project. And drag that rocket in there. Beautiful. Then go back to pubspec.yaml and find the assets portion of your pubspec.yaml and uncomment it and make sure you get the indents right, so the assets should directly align with the pound in the comment up above. I'm going to overwrite this one with assets/rocket.png, and then I'm going to get rid of this one. All right, and if I save that, I can start the application on my device. All right, and so that gives me an error because we have nothing down here in our build method of our home widget. And so let's start with just the basic layout with some placeholders on the screen, and then we can work on the back end and adding the information from the SpaceX API. So we'll take this out, and I do want to return a scaffold. I'm going to give that an app bar, which is an app bar widget, and I'm only going to worry about the title here. And so that will be a text widget, and it will say SpaceX Launch Tracker. And if I put my semicolon down here and I save, we should clear the error. All right. So if we go back to, or go up to main.dart, let's throw this into dark mode, because that's going to look cooler. And so we can do that here in our theme data. We can say brightness is going to be equal to brightness.dark. And there we go. I'd like to center that text bar. So after title, there is center title. We'll set that to true. Save that. So that will center our title. Since we have Google Fonts, let's go ahead and just kind of do a cooler font there. So in the text widget, let's put style, and let's do Google Fonts.ubuntu. We'll need to import Google Fonts. Then you have access to every one of the fonts, and we won't worry about the sizing on that. We'll just let it kind of do its thing. All right, then for a body, so inside the scaffold after the app bar, we're going to do a body. And inside the body, I want to do a container, and I just want to make sure that we are using the full width of the screen so that when we center objects, we are getting the dead center of the screen. And so I'm going to set the width equal to media query of context, size, and width. So that's going to make sure that our wrapping container is taking up the full width of the screen. We will put a column inside that container. And we'll have some children. I'm going to move that down, but I want to put up top, I want to put cross-axis alignment center. So the cross-axis is right to left on a column. We have made sure that our container is the full width, so we'll get the full center of the screen. And then for our widgets, or our inside of our children widgets, I'm going to do a flexible. Oops, I get the right keys. And I'm going to do a flex factor of 2. And what I want to do is take up about 2/3 of the screen with the rocket ship, and then leave the text, the rest for the text. And so my flex factor will be 2. And my child will be an image from asset, and it's going to be our rocket ship. So we'll reference asset/rocket PNG. We'll hit save, and now that's taking up the full width or full height of the screen because we have nothing else on it. So above there, I want to do an expanded widget. And the child there will be a column. And we'll give it some children. And, whoop, meant to say children there. Come on now. There we go. All right, so we'll give it a text, and we'll say next launch. And then we'll do another text that says, this will be our countdown. So let's do like 000000. And then a text that says a rocket name, a rocket type. Okay, so I need a comma after my expanded. Hit save there, and that doesn't look so good. So let's move these to the middle of this 1/3 space that we've set aside on the screen. So that will be main axis alignment center. That will move it to the middle of the space that we have available between the top and the rocket ship. That looks better. I think the rocket ship could use some padding at the bottom of it, so it's not just sitting right there at the bottom of the screen. So let's wrap our image with a padding widget. And let's replace the all with dot only. We'll do just the bottom. And let's do like 30.0 and see how that looks. Yeah, maybe I go a little more, maybe even 50. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Okay, so that's primarily our UI with the exception that the text looks terrible. So let's just add a little bit of styling here, a little bit of a hierarchy so that the eye catches on the right points. So let's start with the countdown. We want the countdown to be nice and big. We also need it to be a mono font so it's not moving in and out as the numbers change. So we'll give it a style. And we'll use Google Fonts, and I'm going to use a font called Source Code Pro. And I just went to Google Fonts, I set mono as my filter, and I just picked out one that I liked. And inside of the Source Code Pro, we can give it a font size, and I'm going to give it 50. Then for the next launch, I'm going to give that a style. I'm going to make that very small. So first of all, we'll give it Google Fonts Ubuntu to be consistent with the title. And we'll give it a font size of 10. And we'll also give it a color of colors.yellow, just so there's a little splash going on of color, like that. It's almost mockingly cruel. Maybe 12 would be better there. Okay, and then the rocket type, we will do also the Ubuntu font. So we'll say style Google Fonts .ubuntu, and we'll give it a font size of 25.0. That looks pretty good. All right, so the SpaceX API is available on GitHub. At the very top, there is a link for the docs, and so I'm going to go to that, and I'm going to look at launches, and I'm going to look at upcoming launches. That's the one I want to grab. And so it gives you a URL here. It's secure API, so it's HTTPS api.spacexdata.com/v3/launches/upcoming. So I'm going to stick that in Postman and get an idea what I have for the data here. Stretch that out a little bit. And so what I want to grab from the results here is the launch date in UTC. And then I want to grab the rocket name. Those are the two pieces of information that I picked out for my UI. You could map as much of this as you want or as little as you want. And so I can see that I can pull the launch date UTC right out of here from a primary property. And then I've got a rocket object that I'm going to have to go into to get the rocket name. And that's what I want to display on my screen. So I'm going to model a rocket object, and I'm also going to model, I think I'll just call this a launch object. I have a list of launch objects here. So this is Flight 94, I can see. And if I scroll down far enough, I get to flight 95. So there's a whole list of upcoming launches here. I am only interested in the top one, so the very next launch. But I do need to know that I'm getting a list back when I go to model. All right, so let's go to our lib folder and let's build two folders. I'm going to need a models folder to build my models in, and I'm also going to need a services folder to build my service call in. So we'll call that services. And then for the model, so like I said, I want to model two objects. I want to model the rocket, and then I want to model the launch. So let's start with rocket.dart. And that will be a pretty simple object because I'm only looking for one property out of that. So we'll call it class rocket. It'll be a final string, which will be my rocket name. And we'll do this dot rocket name for a constructor. And then I need a constructor to take my map and turn it into a JSON, or take the map that I'm given and convert it into a Dart object. So we'll do rocket dot from JSON map of dynamic keys, dynamic values, and we'll call it parsed JSON. And then I need to map each of the properties, which I only have one, to the property in my JSON file. So my rocket name is going to be equal to my parsed JSON, and let me refer back to Postman here. I am looking for rocket underscore name in the JSON. So they're using snake case in JSON, and we're going to use camel case, and we can make that mapping here. Not that way. Square brackets with rocket underscore name. And since that's the last property I'm mapping, I will finish it out with a semicolon. And rocket is all set. So then we can go to models and create launch.dart. And this one is pretty darn simple too. We're going to have a class that we'll call launch. We'll have a date time that will be our launch UTC. And then we'll have a rocket object, which is what we just built, which we'll call rocket. And I'll need to import the rocket model. We'll have our good old constructor with launch UTC and rocket. So we'll do a name constructor there with the curly braces around it. And then we'll do the same thing we did for rocket, which is give ourselves a constructor or a factory constructor to turn our map into our Dart object. So we'll take in a map of dynamic keys, dynamic values, and we'll call it parsed JSON. And we'll map our launch. I meant to say UTC up there. We'll map that to parsed JSON. And just referring back to the launch here, it's launch date UTC. In fact, since I'm here, I might as well copy it and paste it in there. And that's going to give us a string, so we want to datetime.parse that. So we get back a datetime object. We'll do a comma, and we'll map rocket, which will be equal to rocket from JSON. So we'll call our factory constructor, and we will pass it parse JSON rocket. And we're doing that if we refer back to Postman, we're just going to pass it this whole object to our rocket model, and it's going to know that I can go through and pick out the rocket name and store that to the property in the rocket model, which will be embedded in the launch. All right, that's our modeling. So let's go to our services and let's add a new file there, and that will be our launch service.dart. And we'll create a class called launch service. And up here at the top, I want to import a couple of things to start with. I want to import HTTP. And I want the HTTP.dart, and I want to import that as HTTP. Okay. And then from Dart convert, I want to import that as convert. And inside the class, I want to give myself a future launch object, which I'll call fetch launch. It will be asynchronous because we're dealing in futures. And we do need to import our launch item like that. And so we're going to get a response, and that will be the result of awaiting HTTP GET, and this is just our API address. So if I pull back Postman and I copy this, put that there, that is our response. To get that into JSON, I am going to call convert JSON decode and pass it the response, but the response body. I could return at this point, but just for debugging purposes, let's just go launch equals launch.fromJSON and do JSON. And remember, we're getting back an array of items, and I really am just interested in the first one. So we'll just call the very first item on the JSON, and then we'll return the launch. And so I could have just stuck return here. And you can do that just to shorten things, but I think just for purposes of debugging, if we have some errors for starters when I develop, I'd like to keep that line in there. Good, so now let's use provider to resolve that feature and put it into our widget tree. And so if we go back to main and we go up to the material app up here in the my app class, let's wrap that with a widget, and we will wrap it with a future provider. And our provider will be made up of a create, we'll use context in parentheses and the fat arrow, and this is where we can call our service and call our fetch. So let's bring in our service. So inside a build, we will create an instance of our launch service, which we'll call launch service in camel case, and then we will just create an instance of our launch service, and I need to do some importing here. First of the launch service, then of provider, and then the actual provider we create is going to be launch service fetch launch. All right, so that's going to launch our service, and then when we get into our home widget, we can call that back in. And so let's create a variable. And so down here inside of build, we can say var launch equals provider of context. And then we can specify the type that we're looking for, and that's going to be our own launch model, which will need to be imported. All right, so that may or may not have been resolved yet, so we want to code around that possibility. So down here in our body, let's throw a statement in here to check if launch is not equal to null, and then put a question mark here. We're going to present our interface here that we just created, or our presentation widget, and then down here after the container, right there, if we don't have the object yet, we're going to want to display a spinner. So we'll do a center, a child, and the child will be a circular progress indicator. And I'm going to code format that a little bit, clean up. So let me do a restart, see if we get a little bit of a spinner there. There it is, and then it's loaded. So now that we have a launch object, let's replace our hard-coded placeholder here, rocket type, with launch, and then we can reach in there, get some properties. So we want to get our rocket object, and then we want to get our rocket name. And there it is, Falcon 9 is actually our rocket type, to be technical. And so now we just need to come up with a countdown. And so in general terms, what we need to do is we need to get our launch time, and we need to get our time that is now, and we need to calculate the difference, format it into a countdown format, and we need to refresh that. I think every second would make sense, and so that the launch is going down once every second. And to do that, we're going to need some kind of state. And the simplest way I'm going to go about that is I'm going to convert the home widget to a stateful widget. And that's going to give me access to an init state function. So inside of the home state object, I can create an init state object. And one of the things I want to do in here is get a timer started that updates every second. So let's do a timer and a periodic timer, which will repeat itself. We'll give it a duration, and we'll give it a duration of seconds 1. And I'm just going to open up this function a little bit, give us some space. And for starters, let's just print datetime now to string. And so when we restart our state, we should see an update down here every second, and we do. All right, so that's good. That's the kind of thing that you ought to be on the alert up for in your application that might run indefinitely in the background, and you would definitely want to guard against that. So let's set our timer to a timer object. So let's come up here above home state, and let's create a timer, which we'll call timer. And let's set our timer equal to that. And what we can do with that is down below init state, we can create a dispose method and just make sure that when this widget is disposed of, that the timer is also canceled. Oops, not to string. I want cancel. Like that. And then we won't have this thing running indefinitely in the background. All right, so in the body of this timer, what I want to do is I want to get the current time. I want to subtract that from the launch time, and then I want to update the counter. And so the launch we're actually getting down here, I want to be able to access it in init state. So let's create a launch object called launch. And rather than create our variable here, we'll just wipe out the var, and we'll set our launch item in our build method. And then we'll be able to access it in init state. but we only want to do that if there is a launch object. So in that split second when it's still loading, we don't want this function really doing anything. So we'll just say if launch does not equal null, then we're following through on whatever logic we're doing inside here. Now we also want to display the countdown, so why don't we just create a string that is called countdown, and then we can load it from wherever we want. So in the first place, when you come into init state, I don't want that countdown to be null. I want it to have some value. So I'm just going to set countdown equal to a blank string. So when this is still loading, if it doesn't have the countdown yet, it would just be blank. All right, so in here, I can do a variable I'll just call difference or diff. And what I want to do is take my launch UTC time and get the difference between that and datetime.now to UTC. And for starters, why don't I get that in seconds? And then we will set the state off of diff to string. So that's just going to give us the string of seconds, and we will set countdown equal to that. So countdown will start as a blank string. As soon as we have a launch value, it'll fill it in with the total seconds between now and the next launch. And now that we have that object, let's come down here and replace this text placeholder countdown with countdown. And we have added state, so let's restart the state. And there we go. We have a countdown in total seconds to the next launch. Not super impressive looking. We should probably format this up so it's more readable. And let's do it this way. Let's go to the bottom here and let's create a helper function which we'll put out a string and we'll call duration to string, and we can pass in a Dart duration object and get back a string that we would want to display here in the countdown. And so to do that, first of all, I'm going to do a little function called string 2 digits. This is a great package category for someone to write something that just takes a duration and turns it into a nice HH:/MM format. But what I want to do is if n is greater than or equal to 10, I'll return n. And I should have closed that there like that. And otherwise, I'm going to return 0 with n. So I'm just pushing 0 onto the front if there is only one digit. And then so I'm going to create a string, which is our 2-digit minutes. And I'm going to set that equal to 2 digits duration in minutes dot remainder 60 should be, and string 2-digit seconds is equal to 2 digits duration in seconds with the same remainder. All right, and then lastly, I'm going to return, let me just stretch this out so you can see it all. I'm going to return a string with my 2 digits duration in hours colon, 2-digit minutes. And colon, 2-digit seconds. And the hours will actually be, so we're not going to do days or anything. So if we're over 100 hours, you're going to actually see 3. If you look at the 2 digits, it doesn't guarantee 2 digits. It guarantees a minimum of 2 digits. And that's what we want. If we have 200 hours left, we want to show that. All right, so then we have our nice little helper function. So we can come up here and in our init state, instead of saying seconds, if we just take that off, we're going to get a duration. And then we can do our duration to string method with diff. And let me save that. We'll close that. We'll do a restart. And looks like I ended up with some extra spacing in there. I did right there. Get that out. And I don't need to restart. So there we go. The next launch is going to be a Falcon 9. It's going to be in 220 hours, 55 minutes, and 48 seconds as we go. So if you wanted to change this over, you could do, in your duration to string, or up here, if you had more than one day, you could just put the date, or you could put the number of days instead of a countdown. I think this is fine for now. It looks a little goofy with the number of hours, but for our purposes, you could certainly take it and customize it anywhere you wanted from there. So, all right, so I hope you found this useful. I felt like diving into a fun little project, and this kind of scratched the itch. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and we will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.